Welcome to the Slowtwitch podcast, episode 10. We took a break.
A little hiatus.
Yeah, we were a little busy. Yeah, I actually got a Facebook message the other day from one of our followers, and he was like, "What's up with the podcast?" I'm like, "We've been slacking, man. We're going to be back tomorrow."
What happened was Eric and I both have had some crazier than normal travel schedules, and we wanted to be able to deliver the high quality triathlon content you've come to expect from the Slowtwitch podcast. So we took a break.
Yes, it's so high quality. We do research all day, all night.
I do have notes. Like, do not.
Lots of notes in my head. Yeah.
No, I write mine down.
Yeah. Perry Hacker was the one that he's the race director for the Lava Man on the Big Island. So we're actually going to have him on the podcast in a couple of weeks.
That'll be
right. You know where I'm going with that. Like, yeah. What do the locals really feel about triathlon and or Ironman? Like,
yeah, no, like that's going to be a super interesting episode. Not to tease too far ahead, but we have a very good guest next week.
Yes,
to talk through too.
Yes, he set a big record, and we'll go over it next week. But Ryan, why don't you talk a little bit about what you've been up to, because you don't travel very much, and you did.
So, IRONMAN Lake Placid is in my quote unquote backyard, right? It's, under 200 miles away as the crow flies. Takes 4 hours to get there because there's no such thing as a highway that goes east-west. Everything goes north-south to follow all the mountain passes. And so went up to Lake Placid. Originally, I was supposed to be racing it. Unfortunately, injury in life gets in the way. And so went up to cover the race. And I've said this in a couple of different forums, but working a race is infinitely more difficult than actually participating in one of these events. Like, just from a pure day perspective, it is harder to work than it is to race.
Tell my wife that, Ryan. I'm going to have my wife listen to this podcast, because she doesn't understand why I'm so tired she does now. She didn't for a long time, but she does now. I do have to give her credit. She's amazing in the regards of when I get home, she understands, like,
you're wrecked.
It's freaking 17, 19-hour days.
My race day Sunday was 20 hours.
Yeah.
And it's in, like, this isn't to discount like the training and everything else, like up until a race, right? Like, you as an athlete have it very hard, right? If you do your prep correctly, right? Like, the fatigue is real and everything. The race is just kind of the reward for all that work. Your family that is spectating and those that are working have a much harder day on race day.
Maybe that's what's really going on with the sport of triathlon. Maybe it's not the participants that are getting annoyed or sick of it. Maybe it's the spectators.
So there's a little bit to that.
Spouses that are like putting their foot down, being like, "Nah, we're not doing that anymore. We're beach vacation." You
look at the issues that a lot of races are having with recruiting volunteers and people willing to donate their time for something like this. I think there is something to that, where it's just, is that worth my commitment? Being on the ground in Lake Placid, so this year's field, they had a little more than 1,800 starters. They had sold closer to 2,500 slots, so you had a much higher rate of attrition of people with deferrals and transfers than you might have normally expected in a given calendar year. overall, that made, the town was still very busy, right? Like Lake Placid is not massive by any stretch of the imaginations, but it never felt overwhelming.
How is the
Which
construction this year? Because I know last year the
So
construction
it's
was,
all pretty much done, right?
wow,
Like
that's
all
cool.
the work that they'd done in town. So everything was back the oval this
Oh,
year,
sweet. Yeah.
which if you have never been to Lake Placid, that is their second best finish line. Period. End of sentence.
Yeah.
Best one traditionally has been Kona, right?
Hmm.
Um, but finishing on that oval and all of the work that they've done there, but um, it was busy enough, but like hotels weren't 100% full. You saw places downgrade from 4 and 5 night minimums
Hmm.
relatively late. If you were willing to kind of roll the dice on what you needed for accommodations, like there were some people who got hotels in town for under $200 a night.
Oh, wow.
And so, um, nice from a, hey, like I don't want to spend an arm and a leg on this, but a little bit more difficult to rely on. Um, but the big thing that was new kind of this year was, even before the race, Ironman was selling registration for the following year.
Yeah.
And you had really strong uptake from both this year's athletes and their crews getting registered for the race because they were giving you essentially the priority level of registration fee.
Hmm.
Um, so,
Do you
in
know how
talking
much
with
of
some,
a discount that was?
so the quote unquote tier one price was 749, right? And so,
Is it really that
y-
much?
well,
Are
so
we really at $750 for baseline Ironman participant? I am so naive. I should
well,
know this. I don't.
So baseline Ironman pricing for 2024, at least at Lake Placid, was 749. If you were a tri club and a couple other things, they had an additional kind of $50 off
Hmm.
um, discount that was running, but you had to be a registered member of a tri club. They were
Yeah.
checking against rosters in order to make sure that you had that. Um, eh, Here's the thing, though, right? Like the
Who isn't a
margin on
member of a tri
race.
club?
What's that?
Who isn't a member of a tri club?
Well, who is not a member of an Ironman affiliated tri club?
Yeah.
Because let me tell you, there are some clubs that have had issues with making sure that they had the proper points of contact and getting all of those registration stuff together.
Sure,
But
sure.
but backing up for a second, right? Like Ironman took in, like they had a 70 to 80% drop in revenue through the COVID pandemic, right? And they did their damnedest to not lay a ton of people off. They still had to downsize through the course of the pandemic, right?
They furloughed like half of their crew, didn't they?
Well, a lot of the ops people,
Yeah.
right? Like, and a lot of them are back, right? Like a lot of if you've been around a lot of these races in the Northeast, you know who Too Tall is, you know who the Godfather is. Like
Hmm.
those longtime ops guys, all still there, kicking ass and taking names and working
Yeah.
20-hour
Brian.
days all week.
Yeah. Brian
Um,
Mays, who's is
yep,
responsible. Yep. Dave Christian, all those
yeah.
guys.
Um, but when you look at what communities are asking for in terms of certain fees, policing costs, you know, every vendor that you deal with is getting more expensive, right? Like
Well, and then
seven
on top of
four.
that, like you're having Ironman ask those communities for a lot of that in in kind or cash to put on
I
a
mean,
race.
your entry fee does not produce the kind of margin you think it does. right?
No,
Like
no, it
at
doesn't.
the end of
No,
the day, Iron Man
no.
makes its money on retail and partnerships. Like that.
Yeah,
That's
for sure. Well, I
that is
think
what the
I could be wrong, but I still think they're registered as a like a retail um, corporation,
I mean, if you
which they
look
may
at
have
the
to do
way
that
that the
for a tax
pricing
reason.
trend,
But
like over the past 10 years, right? Like Iron Man pricing has not changed that much. 70.3 pricing has changed more frequently than Iron Man pricing has. I think they felt very strongly that they had a hard time going above the tier 4 price at $800, right? Like, because tier 3, like this 749 price point has been like the quote unquote generic price point for a long time.
yeah,
Um, but I think their hand's been forced just a little bit to move on the full distance pricing,
sure.
at least in certain communities, right? Like, and I think certain races probably do need to command slightly different pricing just based on what it costs to operate there, right? Like holding pretty flat. Um, I don't think we're going to see, the same kind of thing where like Ironman New York City was priced at, $1,000 one year and then it was going to be $1,400 the next. And they realized, no, we can't actually get away with that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and
but I think that
even at that price point, they were gonna break even at
at
best.
best, yeah.
Yeah,
But that goes
probably
back
lose
to
money.
like your race entry margins are a very small part of what takes place, right?
Yeah,
Um, but we did see, on the ground, like there were awful lot of people, including yours truly, who put their credit cards down for the 25th anniversary version of the race next year.
hmm
Um, and in talking with a lot of the business owners and everything else, like we're seeing kind of that COVID travel boom. We're on the back side of that hump a little bit in certain places. And so, I think there was a fair amount of sentiment of, oh, at least, we're full this weekend. Even if, they've felt for a while, that the heartache of race day wasn't really worth it anymore.
yeah. Talk to me a little bit about the expo because
The expo
this is
sucked flat out, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
the expo consisted of, a few tents where I had to pick up my media badge and my sweet green press vest.
yeah.
Um, the play try, bike setup, the retail tent, and a couple of really small local things, but no like local shops and
Yeah.
whatnot. I mean, that was it.
What
Uh,
what was missing from like there's two ways to look at this, and I was thinking about this the other day because as a race director, no matter what you do, whether you give away an expo fee for free or whether you charge for an expo, chances are you're going to have people that complain regardless, right? Because unless somebody goes to an expo and they just kill it, they're going to complain. Whether it's free, whether they paid for it, like, vendors that are there to sell, if they don't make a lot of money, some of them are going to complain. And so I was trying to wrap my head around Ironman's failure in the expo because it is a failure. It's a failure. It's completely gone to shit in North America. And and the gut reaction is that they are charging too much. But I also wonder if they just don't care because that was the other thought process in my head was because they're kind of doing that with title sponsorships too, where they're like, we're going to essentially overcharge for this because we don't really care if it gets filled or not. If it's the right partner that's willing to pay for it, then we're going to sell this.
Sure.
But we're not going to back down on it because we don't want to deal with people unless they're paying us to deal with them, which is asinine. But I just wonder what is going through their head. And I can't ever get a straight answer from anybody over there about what is actually going through their head, because, they have all these exclusives that, cut partners out or cut people from coming to the expo. They're obviously trying to funnel everybody through that tent to buy things from a retail perspective. But at the same time, like, their atmosphere at an Ironman event sucks because of it, because there's 1 to 2 other vendors at an expo. And it's not just some expos, it's all of the expos.
So a couple of points on that. One, I mean, is it really that asinine to say, you know what, like the only people I actually want to deal with are the ones that have paid me money to deal with their problems, right? Like, I mean,
No,
I think from an
it's
athlete
from a,
experience perspective, right?
it
Like
is.
it
It is.
drives.
It's very short-sighted, and it's very ignorant, and it's obviously gonna rear its an empty head. But from a financial standpoint, if you're an accountant in the background, like, no, it's not asinine to think that way. But
Um. So, um, a couple of thoughts just on the Lake Placid Expo, right? So
yeah,
one, Oval was very empty, right? Um, Title sponsor there, Athletic Brewing, had a really strong presence all weekend long. Um, from being at the expo site to welcome ceremonies to they had a lot of their ambassadors there on race day. Um, Lots of their NA brews like everywhere post race, right? Like it was a strong activation point for the title sponsor. It probably the best that I have seen in a long time. From the expo itself, generally, the thing that makes Placid a little weird compared to other places is with the Oval and where packet pickup actually sits in the convention center. Like the rest of town and everything that you might need is all right there.
sure,
And so I think the impact of the Oval being a little emptier is um, less of a problem at this particular race because you have so many bike shops and you have the Fallen Arch Run store right there. Every, you know, there's 3 dozen restaurants right along Main Street. Like anything you could possibly need, you you can get, and you can get it while walking around,
mm-hmm.
and not having to do a big hike. Like I think it was more of a problem when there was more construction on Main Street, where it was much harder to get around.
Yeah,
Um, and where stuff was way more spread out um, during those 2 years where they had to move, the expo and everything over to the fairgrounds. Um, you know, I think, you know, thinking of some of the other races that I've either been to or will be going to over the next, couple of months, right? Like those are places where you really kind of feel it. Like Atlantic City, where it's just the retail tent and a couple of, pop-ups, like that just it feels small there on Bader Field and there's nothing around there.
yeah, yeah. The real tell for, because obviously they know this is an issue. I hope they do, and I hope they're taking it serious. They kind of say that they are, but you know how it is with some of them over there. Now, obviously, the World Championships, I think, are going to be a disaster from an expo perspective. Um,
I feel like it's
that's my opinion on it. Like but what will be very interesting to see is when you go to race Ironman Arizona this year, because that community is very tri heavy, and that expo and that area fosters a really good expo experience. And that in the past has always been full of tents and tri clubs. And so it'll be interesting to see what that particular event is like moving into it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I I think they know that they have a problem, right? And I
But
from
do
an
they?
athlete,
Because they're not,
I do.
they're not, but what are they, because they're
Well,
not
so
helping themselves out with it. Like they're not dropping rates. They're not they're like, if there's not a lot of people at the expo, it's because it's too expensive to attend.
well, I mean,
Like that's the reason, right?
well,
Like
so well, part of that too is, this is part of the problem with worlds being split, right? Is
oh, this has
brands,
always been the problem with
but
worlds
but
being split.
even but you know now you've made it times two, right? Like,
Times
and
four,
you've with
because
travel, and
yeah,
it's just that nightmare scenario is going to come home. And I'm curious as to which expo feels bigger, because I think there are some brands that certainly are going to want to be at the all women's event, and because it's Kona, right?
they
And
are,
I
but
think,
they're banding in it, man. Like I've talked to a lot of brands, and like they're there to support, but they're not doing it in the expo. Like they're there to support the women, and they're all irritated about it. They're pissed because they want to do a better job. They want to be in the expo. They want to do things right, but they don't have the budgets, and they can't justify based on the numbers to do the presence that it would cost to do. And so you've got all of these, companies that have been a part of the sport for such a long time, and they're all saying the same thing, and that is they're not getting anywhere with Ironman from a pricing standpoint, from an activation standpoint, and they don't know what to do.
it sounds like a problem for a new CEO to solve for.
Yeah, or their current, sales and marketing officer or whatever. Whoever's in charge of there, is it Matt too? Whoever's in charge of like the overpricing that's going on, like they've got to start taking this seriously, because it's an issue and it's not going to go away.
Yeah, and I mean, I
It's
think
been an issue.
uh, part of what an athlete pays for, right, is just overall experience,
Yeah.
right? Like, and that isn't just, a very safe and well produced event on race day. It's all the other stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, Lake Placid. So Joe Skipper won.
yeah, I had to run after Joe because I was up the condo downloading photos, and he passed the final turnaround on Mirror Lake Drive, and I realized that at the pace he was running, I had 6 minutes to get my camera shit back together and run to the finish line. Um, which I almost caught Rach McBride as she was going out for her their second loop of
Mm-hmm.
the run, and I don't think Rach particularly appreciated guy in media vest with camera flying everywhere, uh,
Ah,
being
Rach, no
hot on
sweat
their
stuff.
heel. um, but yeah, fun fact: you need carbon plated shoes if you're going to be doing that. Like,
Whatever.
if you're going to be running
Yeah.
around like that.
And then Alice Alberts won the
Yeah, super big breakthrough
Elise. Sorry.
for her. Just really, like, Placid has been known for two things. One is kind of somewhat otherworldly performances, and two has been for someone random to come out of nowhere
Yeah.
and surprise everybody. And you got both.
Yeah.
I mean, Skipper had an absolutely ridiculous day all day long. Um, even, like we got to see kind of his water bottle fairing setup with his arms up close and
All
personal,
the
which was
things.
it was really like in person it looks way better than it did seeing it on video, right? Like it looks really smart. And yes, there's some stuff in there. Like it's not just there to sit out there.
It
But
is. It is. I don't know if it's smart to do, but it's a smart concept because I mean Joe's an intelligent person that sometimes doesn't think through everything, but he thinks through a lot. Like there's not a lot of common sense to Joe in certain aspects. Like I remember the first time that he was in Lake Placid and he just thought he was going to take a taxi everywhere, because in England there's taxis everywhere. So, so when I say there's not a lot of common sense when it comes to certain things with Skipper, like that's one of them. But
so
from an
I will note.
intelligence standpoint, like that guy is I swear he's probably on the spectrum. He reminds me a lot of my son JT, where like there is certain things that he is just when he starts talking, it just goes way over my head. Like I can't even keep up with his thought process on it. And then about an hour later, after I kind of digested, I'm just like, holy shit, that guy is smart.
So to your point, Joe learned because he had a beater bike to get around,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
um, which was funny seeing it. Like I think it was 7 o'clock, and I'm going back to my condo because it's like, all right, most of the pro stuff is done for now, and I need a rest because I've got another 4 hours worth of work to do on the other side of this. And just seeing him with his with that beater bike, and I'm like, oh my god. Like
yeah,
yes, this was actually smart. But you know seeing him through town and everything, like could move the arms super easily, right? Like it looks worse than it is, right?
yeah.
It's just I
That's
think
good because it
it was
scares me when I look at it.
yeah, no, like
Particularly if like some age group athlete that doesn't know how to handle a bike just decides
super,
like
like you could
that's how
move.
they're gonna get their Kona slot. Like
No, just super easy to move your arms in and out of there. At least Joe made it look really easy,
yeah.
right?
Because he's
Um,
even the first person to say like it's not for every course. Like there's definitely courses I use it on, and then there's courses regardless of having to explain it to the refs or whatever. He's just like there's courses that it doesn't make any sense on.
um, and like Ben Hoffman had a great race, and being able to see what uh, him with his family there at the
Yeah.
finish line, like that was a really cool moment. Um, just it
I think
it
that's gonna be his
felt quote
last
unquote
Ironman.
it felt quote unquote normal, right?
Yeah.
Like being there in person, like it's like, oh, it's a little smaller than it was, in 2019, but it still feels pretty damn big.
Yeah.
Um, and
That's
that was
awesome.
cool.
Yeah. That's really cool. And then we had Maine happen.
Yeah, 70.3 Maine, my old stomping grounds. Um, Now up in Augusta. Trevor Foley with an unbelievable bike and run performance. Like,
Yes.
um, the craziest downriver swim I've ever seen in my life.
Fast
when
currents.
uh so I would estimate that the current had to be about 120 per 100
Really?
downstream
That
because
sounds like a triathlon in Burley, Idaho
it
called the Spudman. And it's put on by the the Rotary Club. It's the coolest Olympic sprint race in the country because it's in the middle of nowhere, Idaho. It's put on by a bunch of old farmers that are raising money for a charity. They do it through the Rotary Company, the club, and it's a downriver swim. And the the fast Olympic swimmers do it in about 9 minutes. And you get every single newbie in Utah and Idaho and Wyoming and Montana to drive into the middle of nowhere, camp in like this bug infested field to like get their swim PR.
Yeah, no, the lead pro male swim I think was 14:20.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, but no, what sealed it was seeing the pros warming up, and they had a single buoy set maybe 50 yards out above the dock where you were jumping in to go downriver, so you had to swim upstream, and nobody made it to the buoy. Like, just it looked like an endless pool, right? Like, it was unbelievable.
So I didn't watch this. So was it clearly wasn't an in-water start, was it?
So
like, how did they do that with the age groupers?
So I have no idea. So it was they were all hanging onto the dock and then went, and then at least my experience in this kind of thing would be, so they're starting roughly 6 athletes every 5 seconds, countdown timer, and you would either, jump in or you'd be
swept away. Dang it. I wish I was there. Some races I really do wish. I'm very sad that I missed. That would have been just pure entertainment to watch.
So anecdotally, there is a guy in Tri Club that I know of, and he's like, one of my fellow swimmers at this master's program. He's like brand new, like in the pool, he is 3 minutes per 100. His swim time was 21:30.
Nice.
Right?
Good for him. Yeah. Yeah. What was it? Why was it so much faster than normal? Just because of rain?
So the Kennebec River is usually got a fair amount of current in it.
It's like any other downwind swim that's in some of the triathlons around here.
So, it's the main feeder, right? Like to go out to the Gulf of Maine. Yeah. So you have all of these various tributaries and streams and rivers that wind up feeding into the Kennebec. Mm-hmm. And then you factor in that we have had so many severe rain events over the last 6 weeks, including the night before the race. There was another 4 to 5 inches of rain that got dumped in certain parts of Maine and New Hampshire the night before. Like, it was hauling ass.
We had some reader that was just ripping the story because he was convinced that Ironman had like put it there to like set PRs, and it's just funny to get people's opinions on things. And then someone jumped in really quick and was like, whoa. Like this isn't what they were doing.
So one, I know Zev Meyerowitz, who's a phenomenal age group athlete, probably could have taken his pro card at one point or another, but
it was smart and figured out it wasn't worth it.
Well, he's a doctor in Cape Elizabeth, Maine. Like, he's a good guy. But if you're going to have a race in Augusta, like, there's literally only one place that has enough space to put transition and everything else, and that's where it is today. And the only body of water that's anywhere close to that's the Kennebec.
Yeah.
So it's this or nothing. And, given the level of outcry that we've seen over the, cancellation of the full distance race in Mont Tremblant after this year. Like, people get big mad when the schedule gets downsized a little bit. So,
Yeah.
and Augusta had, or Maine had, more than 2,000 athletes registered for the race. Like,
Yeah.
that feels like an event that is pretty healthy. Like, people seem to want it there. Came off really well. It's a challenging bike and run course. Kind of makes up for the fact that you do have a paper bag swim.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's not any different than the Florida bike course. I mean, it's about as easy as you can get. It's
But the
just,
Florida swim can kick your ass too,
yeah, it
right?
can.
Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it just depends on how things go. Like, Florida's also been a race where it's been 38 degrees at the start of the day.
Yeah.
Could also be in
Yeah.
the 70s, right?
Very
Like,
true. Yeah.
can only
So we've
race
been,
what happens race day.
yeah. So we've been busy. We've been busy with, traveling to races, covering the races. We just talked about, Ironman Lake Placid, 70.3 Maine. Talk to us a little bit about, because you were watching the main race, talk to us about Justin Metzler, which we've got an audio clip for that will play for you now. And then once that plays, we're going to talk about it. So, Brian, you didn't really know what was going on with this whole situation.
So, we didn't see what had happened to Justin in transition, right? He had a very good swim for him, and then cameras started going up the road, and the next time that we saw him on camera, his jersey's flapping everywhere in the wind.
Yeah.
And pretty immediately, like, knowing that, Justin's a smart guy, he knows what the data looks like on a lot of this stuff. I went, oh, he must have tried a bottle fairing down his jersey and busted the zipper, right? Because a lot of these tri kits, particularly if it unzips the whole way at the bottom, like, you can pop that zipper really easily, and then you're like, good luck trying to put that all back together while riding. Like, it's
Sure.
just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, and as Justin talked about, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
He's trying to handle this massive bladder bottle thing and like handle the bike. We never saw the bottle on camera either, right? Like, so
Right. He did a good job with it.
pro tip, like, hats off to him. Like, I have no idea how he did that.
Right. 20 miles. 20 miles of
On
carrying
not
that thing.
and the terrain through there, like, you had the best kind of descent and place to pick up speed. Maine's roads can be pretty technical in terms of how you need to approach riding them in order to maintain speed and not have to go really, really deep on power spikes and everything else. And so I'm not surprised that, like, the place that Justin was losing time was on those more technical, like, downhill sections, because, like, unless you're fully committed, you're going to lose time there.
Yeah.
And then, when Trevor kind of rocketed through him, like, at the aid station, it's like, well, that explains a fair bit. Like, because I would have assumed that even, like, had Justin not been having problems, like, when Trevor came through, like, that's when you would expect Justin to make a move on the bike.
Yeah.
Because he similarly, like, he's not the runner that Trevor is, but he's certainly, the kind of guy who's gonna go with a bike move and
Mm-hmm.
try to put a stamp of authority on the race there, and
Yeah.
just it he couldn't. But you saw that once he got his jersey back under control, um, he was able to then ride more to what he's capable of, and then put together kind of a a good remainder of the race, is still kind of 2 to 3 minutes down on the best of the run times, but 1:15 still isn't, it's not a slow half marathon.
No, particularly he's just starting to kind of get back into form with his injury that he had during the early part of the season, where he was basically ellipticaling it for like 4 months. So now in the audio clip, he talked about, Matt being disqualified for the rule that a lot of people don't know exists. And apparently Matt didn't either, which Michael Lovato taught me this rule 22 years ago when I was racing at Utah 70.3, and he had passed me on his second lap of the run, and I had just unzipped my zipper. Actually, no, because that was before full zippers. Like back then, that was the DeSoto full piece. So I had like taken my jersey completely off the top because it was like 95 degrees. It was the year that like Peter Reed like walked during the half because it was so stinking hot. It was the year that Tony DeBoom won it. But he even like the rule's been around forever. Like,
well, so a couple of points on this, right? So one, this goes back to the overarching effort that Ironman's made to align their rule book closer to the world triathlon setup, right? Where, 10 years ago, everyone was freaking out because you weren't allowed to have the zipper below a certain point on your sternum, right? Like, heaven forbid. And then we realized, no, what we're really trying to do is we don't want any male nipples showing.
That's right, man.
Because, heaven forbid. And so
just male nipples.
Women are
nipples, right? It's save the nipple, Ryan. Save it.
Obviously. And then we all realized that, if a guy really wanted to, they could Ferricel Sultan it, right? Like, if you want to have a men's sports bra, like totally legal, right?
Yeah, go for it.
But if you do that, and you've seen Haley Chura actually do this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where if you opt to go down to just the bra or, a sleeveless top like that,
we'll call it a run top.
You have to roll the full sleeved down to your waist, right?
Yeah.
So the way that the rule is written today is, one, you can't run in a bare torso. If you do, it is a variable time penalty, and you're disqualified if you're not promptly remedying it. That's part one of the rule. Part two of the rule dictates that the top has to completely cover your shoulders, and that if the zipper can go all the way down and become detached, it must remain attached. This was something that came up, probably 8-9 years ago when Jesse Thomas had some issues with the zipper, and he was forced to like safety pin his top back together to not run afoul of that rule.
Right.
But this has been on the books for a really long period of time. And very simply, the rule is, if you get caught, it's a disqualification if you don't immediately fix it.
Right.
And then the last part of that rule, which appears after the penalty, is that your jersey should be fully zipped when you cross the finish line.
I just thought that was common sense.
It's a relatively throwaway line, but it's in there. Like, you have to do it. And unfortunately for Matt, like he had the kind of top that fully detached at the bottom. He ran with it like that. He crossed the finish line like that. He, was third on the road And
why would he do that though? Like, why would he cross the finish line without representing his sponsors?
Because athlete brain is real, Eric.
I know, but
do you know how, like, even when I was working IRONMAN Lake Placid, and
it's not
still
like
I
he was in
got
a
stupid
sprint
on race
finish.
day,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Lessons learned, I guess.
And
Matt's a good guy, man. I like Matt. Matt's it is a bummer.
sucks
Just
for
like
him
Justin
to.
said. Yeah, I mean, just like Justin said, like it was a bummer, because he deserved the. Well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I guess.
I mean, it goes back to like, at some point you have responsibility to know the rule book, right? Like,
Yep.
if this is your job, you have one job. And like, to give that situation slightly in reverse, like going back to Lake Placid for a moment, like that one picture I have of Joe Skipper in the article, like he left transition and he had like a plastic bag of his stuff and he was carrying it with him and he wanted to dump it right then and there. And he got told, like, no, you have to take that to an aid station. And
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I captured the moment where he was like very mad about it. Like, fundamentally unhappy that he had to carry this bag with him. But
Joe's like grunting.
But you know what? He brought it with him.
He did it
because he listened to the official,
yeah,
right?
Man.
Like, he had one job and he did it.
Yeah, true.
And so, it sucks that that's the way that he had to learn it. I think the way that rule is written, where it's just like, it's auto DQ if you don't immediately remedy it. Matt says he wasn't told, right? Like, I don't know. Regardless, he'd probably have wound up with a time penalty. Like, even if the rule's slightly different, okay, time penalty. Let's slide you down to 5th, 6th, right? Like, you're off the podium anyways.
Right.
It's just, it's unfortunate. I'm sure he won't do it again because, you learn that lesson. It cost him a few $1,000, right? Like,
oh yeah, more than that with bonuses. Yeah.
And last mention, well, 2 last mentions from Maine. One, slow twitcher Ben Deal, 4th place, outstanding performance out of that guy. And Nicole Falcaro with a breakthrough, getting her first podium.
Nice.
So good stuff on their fronts.
How is Ben Deal doing? I haven't talked to the guy forever.
He's had ups and downs, particularly through COVID. This is his strongest result in a Ironman branded event, I think, in 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Just a really, like, and really it was his run that put him up the field. Like, he had a very, very good day at the office. And it still makes me laugh whenever I log into the tracker. Whenever I log into the tracker and I see it's his dog, like, always makes me laugh.
Yeah. Which, I mean, not to take away from him, but I mean, he's still 13 minutes down from first. I mean, even Justin was 11 minutes down from first. I mean, Justin had a huge, issue with his, but it's crazy how fast some of these.
Trevor stomped the field on the bike. Yeah. Like, he went to the front early and then just went and fucked off. Like, goodbye.
He had the second fastest run too. I mean, he was sub 112. Yeah.
If the man could just swim just a little faster.
He trains with Lionel,
he'll get there. He's 24, I think.
I know. And Lionel's such a good example to him. I I would love to go hang out with those two for like a couple of days, because I would imagine that Lionel has been a wealth of knowledge of what to do and what not to do in the sport of triathlon to Trevor.
Bring some sweet Nebraska beef with you.
Ooh, maybe. I don't know. I'd have to get past Talbot. I don't know if I could do that. Well, maybe.
So, briefly speaking of Talbot, because Talbot is on the ground in Milwaukee this week,
Yeah, so is
that
Kenny.
guy is the only one hyping up the race this weekend.
Really?
He is doing a fun, seriously, from a
Well, he's good
promotional
at it.
standpoint,
Like
he's
his.
been very good.
I don't do it very often, but I was thinking about Talbot last week because one of his YouTube videos came up, and it was his Kona recap video from like 5 years ago when it was just him, and it had like, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was close to like 500,000, if not more. And it was the year that it was sponsored by Everyman Jack. And like, the kid is so, and I shouldn't say kid because he's a grown ass man. He's so talented when it comes to the excitement of the sport.
Yeah.
And I wonder what, and this is hindsight, right? And I say this out of pure respect and admiration for what his talents are. But I wonder what it would have been like if he would have just kept going in that direction instead of trying to produce other people's successes, instead of him being the success. Instead of him, if he would have just had a little bit more, and I don't know if it was confidence or desire or what, because I've never really asked him those questions. But I had that moment where I was just like, geez, man, like, I wonder what it would have been like if he would have just kept going. If he would have, followed the Ironman rules and not got in trouble and didn't feel like he needed to go, latch on to pro athletes instead of just doing the things for himself. I wonder where that would have went, because like, I was fully entertained for like an hour, and I don't get entertained that often when it comes to the sport of triathlon, as far as like really being able to look at somebody and be like, man, that was unique. Like, they did a good job with that.
I think we could probably sit here and ask the same question of like a Taryn Gessel, right? Like, what would have happened had you not chased certain YouTube trends with, like Triathlon Taryn as your brand, right? Like,
Yeah.
and going in 15 different directions. And, I think in the case of Talbot, like, I don't think he'd be unafraid to say, to come on here and talk a little bit about that and the decisions on some of that stuff that he made. I think he makes some of the, like, when you think of professional triathlon content, like outside of the Ironman broadcasts, he's probably the best at it right now. Like, from a pro athlete, like, and building kind of that hype and excitement around the elite level of the sport.
Yeah. Well, he has access, and that's the
access is
key.
huge, right? But
Yeah.
like, it's a combination of having access and also having the viewpoint and like
Pure
the
passion too.
skills
Like,
to.
gosh, he's just like, I've never met anybody that is so enamored with the sport of triathlon than him.
And he's got the skills to do it.
Yeah,
Right.
he does.
Like, and that's a really rare combination of things to be able to kind of pull that together.
Yeah.
But
Talbot, if you're listening, man, just keep flying that flag, dude. Just
why don't you try opening your seltzer bottle while you're
It's a struggle, man. It's a struggle. Dude, I know. I went on a long run this morning, and I was supposed to go at like 6, and that didn't happen. And then I was supposed to go at 8 and that didn't happen. And then finally at like 10, I got to go out and go run. And my dog's like in the corner just hating life because she's just so tired. But
Well, I
let's
mean,
talk a little bit about what happened on the site, because we're starting to get close to our hour, which I don't know why we really worry about that. It's not like we're called like the triathlon hour or something like that.
no,
But
no, we are not.
but we've got, so I actually I dove into some saddle reviews.
Yes. The most
Yes.
important part of a bike.
I'm starting to think it's pretty close to it. Outside of fit, saddles are pretty important, even though a lot of people don't tend to think it. But we did review the new Cadex saddle, the Amp saddle,
Yep.
and I wouldn't say that it's super special, but I would say that it's a damn good saddle. Um, and I don't think it's supposed to be super special. Like basically it's the same saddle that they had in the original Boost, but what they've done essentially is they've made it a little bit more narrow, a little bit lighter, and it's got more of a curvature to it, which
Sure.
to me it was a two-step process. Number one, it required way more fiddling to get it right. So, for example, if I'm on a typical saddle that's kind of flat, so I'll just use one of like the pro saddles because I've ridden a lot of the Shimano pro saddles before. They don't have a whole lot of curvature. They kind of, they focus on width. They focus on, for lack of a better word, the taint line in the middle of the saddle. Like that's their focus. So I can get on one of those things and I can get on the bike once and I know exactly whether or not I need to tilt it or drop the nose down. I'm usually pretty good. It takes about 5 minutes and then I'm fine. And then I kind of figure out really quick if it's too wide for me. With this particular saddle, it took me like 45 minutes. I had to get off the bike like 4 times to get the angle right of this saddle. And at first, I was a little worried because I didn't like it at all at first. I started to get a lot of pain in my pelvic area and my hands started to get numb. And I was just like, crap, like, what am I, it's like, because you got to be honest about it. If you don't like something, you got to say it. But then I finally found that sweet spot. And as soon as I found that sweet spot, everything that they said that they were trying to do with this new saddle started to become very clear with how I felt riding it. So, the advantages of the saddle, it's a road saddle. It's not a triathlon saddle. It's not designed to be on a time trial bike, which is, the Wove saddle that we'll get in just a second. Two totally different saddles. But when I was climbing, so it's a climbing saddle. So it's designed for pro riders on that type of environment where you're in mountain stages and things like that. So I decided to go on a ride up Immigration Canyon, which is a local ride here in Utah. And while I was climbing, I could feel all of those attributes in that saddle be very accurate with the actual riding that was going on, all the way down to when I was descending, I could feel the same thing that went into it. So, great saddle, but it's going to take you a second to get it really dialed in.
And that brings up 2 points, right? Like one, if your saddle's not right, like the rest of the fit just it can't be right.
You're miserable.
Right? And
you're absolutely miserable.
Your saddle choice, right? Like this is why like it took a little bit of time for you to fiddle with it. Like one anytime you adjust any contact point, like the rest of the fit has to dynamically change a little bit, right?
Yep.
Like where you needed to be on that saddle to keep the rest of your contact points because I'm sure you didn't move your handlebars, you didn't change crank length or anything. Like, you threw it on a bike. You had to move some stuff around in order to get to where your body needed to be.
Yeah.
And then secondly, like, a saddle has a thankless job. Like, when it's good, you don't really sing its praises. You don't do anything. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. You're not like,
that
oh,
didn't
it's so
suck.
aero. It's so cool
But
looking.
like, when it's wrong, you hate everything about it.
Yeah. Yeah, you do. And a lot of people, I don't think, understand that, particularly new triathletes and new cyclists, and so that's one of the reasons why Dan has always been very particular about riding saddles and the importance of saddles, and we're going to continue to do that because Physique's got a new saddle that we're going to look at here pretty soon, and and so there's some other saddles that are launching that we'll start to look at, because it really is the second most important aspect of a bike fit, and what is actually on your bicycle.
Yeah.
So, and then we dove into the most expensive tri saddle. I think the most expensive saddle, I don't know, there's probably another saddle out there that's like covered in gold or something, but
I mean, some of the pure like, all carbon everything gets up there, but
yeah,
the
which is,
Wove is,
yeah, it's expensive. It's $595 is the cost of this saddle. It's the Wove, it's the V8 saddle,
yeah.
particularly the time trial position saddle. And I don't, I didn't have any issues with it, man. Like, I got on that saddle and it was comfortable from the very moment I got on the saddle. And do I think they should have priced it at $595? No. I think they should have priced it at like $495. But at the same time, they're trying to make a little bit of money off of it. And they're a small company. They're doing the manufacturing in the United States. It's super expensive. And it's a good saddle. Like, it's
I mean,
one piece carbon construction. It comes with a lifetime warranty on the frame. The top upper, which is really super stable, comes with a year warranty. 5 years down the road, if you need to replace it, it's $100. It gets shipped. It gets shipped back to you in like 4 days. Like, basically, what I've kind of come to the conclusion on is you're paying an extra $100 for warranty, peace of mind, longevity. That's what you're paying for. So,
yeah, and I mean,
and it's
look,
super light. Like, it's
the way that
crazy
it's
light.
constructed, right? Like, there are reasons why it costs what it does.
Yeah.
Um, and again, it kind of goes back to, you know, because a saddle is not a sexy piece of bike equipment, right? Like, uh, people don't get that mad when you talk about a $3,000 wheel set, or
Or a $7,000 wheel set that we're about to go into next week.
like the latest version of electronic shifting, right? Like,
It is
there
interesting though, isn't it? Like,
there are
how,
certain uh,
like, it is mind boggling. Like, yeah, it's expensive. Like, $600 is expensive, but at the same time, when you look at what people are spending on other things, like people are like, it's the same people that are complain about a $600 saddle are going to be the ones that literally buy $1,000 wetsuit,
well, I mean,
and that's not even made out of carbon. Like, this is rubber.
um it's just, it goes back to, I think people have certain expectations as to what certain things should cost. And
Yes,
like,
yes, should.
because a saddle, right? Like, you can get an Adamo off of Amazon right now for $139, right?
Yeah,
Like, and for, certain people, that's going to be like a great fit. But it's the same as ski boots or anything else, right? Like, my wife's new set of ski boots this past year cost over $1,000.
Right.
Right. But that's what she needed in order to be well connected to the ski and to be able to ski to her best ability. Like
Yeah.
that's what it costs. That saddle is going to be a great fit for certain people, including yourself, like it sounds like. Um, and then you have to ask yourself, like, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah.
Still cheaper than an Ironman entry.
That's a good point.
I mean, right? But no, I probably didn't do it any favors with the way that I phrased the social post, but like for some people, that $595 is an absolute bargain compared to the money that they would have spent on bike fits, on trying other saddles, on shorts, on chamois cream, on treatment for the saddle sores that they're dealing with, like the
Yeah.
thousands upon thousands of dollars that people spend chasing their own tail when the real problem was like, shit, you just needed to spend a little bit more the first time around on the saddle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. With that note, anything else on the site that people should check out?
I mean, everything that we've got going on the site, right?
We've got some good forums threads going on the site right now. What's up with the Chelsea Sodaro one? Like, talk to me a little bit about that, because I didn't watch the clip.
So very briefly, Chelsea, like in part of the PTO US Open, like preview content, right?
Yeah.
Like was talking about, her credentials as an athlete, right? Defending Ironman world champion, kind of a big
True.
deal.
Check.
And essentially saying that, like she needs to have like a killer mindset when she goes and races, right? Like she doesn't do the friendly, like, oh, you're doing a great job thing. Like, no, she's there to kick ass and take names, right? Like that's essentially the gist of what she said.
Good for her.
And people got mad about it. And, like some of it just the worst.
Like the participant trophy people got mad. Like, who got
No,
mad?
no. So one, our forum is not the participant trophy people, like to put it in your terms. No, like
Some of them are.
uh, there's so many words I want to use that I won't.
Ryan, it's the podcast. You're allowed to.
I'm self-censoring. um the worst post was the one that said that they couldn't stand the tone of Chelsea's voice. And it's like, okay, now you're doing the women are shrill thing. Like, go away. Like, just, you suck. Like, why are you here?
Yeah. I also feel the need to get on a social platform and voice my opinion about that as well.
But, you know, what I went back with was like when we have male athletes, particularly in North America, right? Like who talk somewhat of a big game, like they're in the same kind of thing of having a killer mindset. Like they're very much celebrated for it. Like
Oh, yeah.
the biggest one's Jordan, right? Like Jordan was a notorious asshole, but like dude won 6 championships and is, widely regarded as the greatest of all time, right? Larry Bird, legendary trash talker,
Yeah.
right? Like, and revered for the fact that he talks trash. I mean, Charles Barkley today, right? Like on TNT, makes fun of everything, including the
Sure.
city of San Antonio whenever he's on.
Okay,
Right?
but these are
Like,
all basketball players, Ryan. Talk about the sport of triathlon males
I
that
mean,
do this.
Chris McCormick,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like, legendary trash talker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But also a good sportsman, which
yeah,
Chelsea is too. Like her, just because she says her mindset is like that on race day, doesn't mean that that's what she feels like when she passes somebody. I mean,
no,
two
no.
totally different things, right? Like,
I mean, if you if you're treating this as your job, right? And if you are treating this as like, I have to beat these people, right? Like what your mindset is from, the cannon start until you cross the finish line is going to be one thing. And then you can be the best of friends outside of that.
Yeah.
Right. Like, isn't that what the majority of us like kind of seek out when we're in a tri club or a group ride? Like, I've jokingly referred to as a bunch of group rides I've done as the Tuesday night world championships, right?
Yeah.
Like, wheels up, we are trying to beat the ever loving snot out of one another. And
Yes.
then when we're done, we are all sharing beers and laughing about it.
Yes.
That's what we're there for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if that's what Chelsea needs and to do in order to be able to compete, like, why the hell aren't we celebrating that?
Yeah.
Like, that's
Yeah.
the part that really kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
Right.
Our forum in a nutshell.
There we go. There we go. On that note, thank you so much for joining us. We're not going to promise we're going to do this every week, but we're sure going to try to do it every week.
As long as we're not, running all over God's green earth, we sure are going to try.
There we go. All right, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we will probably talk to you on the forum.
Thanks all.